Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 21 Hats podcast. I'm your host, Lauren Feldman. When Kate Morgan started thinking seriously about selling her business, she assumed the big payoff would come at closing. But, as she tells David C. Barnett and Paul Downs this week, she's come to understand that the smarter move might be not selling, at least not yet. Why? Because if the business keeps performing and she can gradually remove herself from the day-to-day operations, she may ultimately make more money by continuing to own it. That's partly because, as David explains, small businesses often sell for lower multiples than owners expect, which means the real value may not be in a clean exit, but in continuing to collect profits while slowly transitioning ownership to key employees. So you'll be selling the business, says David, and you'll be collecting dividends or distributions on top of that. This is one of the most lucrative exits there can be. Of course, delaying a sale comes with its own risks. Markets change, businesses cool off, buyers get nervous. You have to make the decision and make the sale happen while you've got a full head of steam, David warns. Wait too long, and the numbers can start sliding in ways that dramatically reduce what buyers are willing to pay. Plus, a Reddit post raises a brutal management challenge. What's the best way to lay off a relative? It really can't affect your decision, says Paul, because if it needs to be done, it needs to be done. That doesn't make it easier. It just means you may have to live with both the business consequences and the family consequences at the same time. Even in good times, owning and running a business can be a lonely pursuit. Our hope is that these weekly conversations let owners know they are not alone in facing challenges. In fact, that's the whole idea behind the 21 Hats community, engaging with other owners to get the kinds of insight only another owner can offer. If you're interested in learning more, you can sign up for the Morning Report newsletter, which offers examples every day of owners confronting challenges and seizing opportunities. Just search the 21 Hats Morning Report to subscribe. Joining me this week on the podcast are David C. Barnett, who is based in New Brunswick, Canada, and helps people buy and sell businesses. Paul Downs, CEO of Paul Downs Cabinet Makers, which is based outside of Philadelphia and makes custom conference tables. And Kate Morgan, who is CEO of Boston Human Capital Partners, which is based in Boston and offers recruiting and fractional HR services. The episode is titled, "The Real Payoff May Be in Owning, Not Selling." Before we get started, this episode is brought to you by Grasshopper Bank, a full-service digital bank. I've been speaking with Chris Tremont, who is Grasshopper's Chief Digital Officer, about the bank's offerings. In this segment, I asked Chris how many branches Grasshopper has and what advice he has for business owners looking to choose a bank. Chris, we all know the world is changing. Do you have any advice for business owners looking for a bank?
I think it's really important to say at the ground level, does the bank have the ability to grow or scale with you as your company grows? And what I mean by that, are there banking solutions that are going to allow you to move money in and out the way that you would like to? Are the rates and fee structures appropriate as you grow that sort of fit your financial perspective? Is credit or borrowing something that is going to be core to growing your business? And if so, what does that relationship look like with the bank? So I think there's multiple components to consider here, and there's a lot of banks out there that provide a lot of different things, and not two are the same. So it's important, I think, to do your homework.
How many branches does Grasshopper have, Chris?
We have 0 branches, Lauren. We are a digital business bank. 0 branches doesn't mean that we're not a real bank.
I think that's an important point. You're not a fintech. You are a chartered bank.
Yes, we are. We actually do work a lot with fintechs behind the scenes, powering programs where we're the chartered bank holding the deposits and helping to move the money. But Grasshopper on its own, in our direct offerings to small businesses, is a chartered institution. We're a member of the FDIC, where we provide FDIC insurance on deposits, and we're national in scope. We just believe that we can serve small businesses better and more efficiently in terms of what they're looking for by providing great digital tools and still coupling that with the human element. So there is sort of that human in the loop concept of we've got a US-based customer support that's 7 days a week. We have some relationship managers that businesses can work with however they need to, whether it's a Zoom call, by text, by phone. We do have people there behind the scenes should you need us as well.
And now, on to the episode. Welcome, Dave, Paul, and Kate. It's great to have you all here. Kate, I want to start with you. You've been telling us lately about your evolving thinking about whether you want to sell your business or not. What's your latest thinking?
Okay. I know I'm not going to do anything with this company for 5 years. I had originally been thinking about selling sooner. I talked to my team and they encouraged me not to because they're just enjoying it. And you know what? I do love my team, but I need to have an exit plan. And in thinking about this, now I'm sort of morphing because I do want to give it to my team.
Give it to your team?
Well, let's put it this way. So ESOP programs are super complicated. And so I'm starting to investigate other ways of how I could make this something like a perpetual trust for my employees. And so that's when I started talking to my business coach, and he was recommending something like, I don't know if it's new or what. It's not something I've encountered before, but it's called an employee ownership trust. And so I figured I'd kind of bring this to you guys and see if anybody's experienced with this, the pitfalls, if there's any gotchas, or just how to start to think about it in that way.
It is something we've talked about on the podcast before. Last year at the 21 Hats Live event, we were in Ann Arbor at Zingerman's, where Ari Weinzweig, one of the co-founders, talked about how Zingerman's went through the process of becoming an employee ownership trust. And at one point, Jay Goltz was thinking about it too. And I had him on with somebody who knows a lot about it and talked it through. It is a lot simpler than an ESOP. Dave, this is your area.
Yeah.
Is that something that you've encountered?
Well, there's more and more people talking about it. It is relatively new in the US, and then the same idea has just been introduced in Canada as well. I think one of the things about these trusts is that the first assumption that is made is that you have a business that will be enduring for a really long, long time, and that everybody who works in the business is at some point going to be able to meet the standards of being a part of benefiting from the ownership. And I think it's a really interesting idea, and I can see how people are attracted to it. I can tell you, though, it's a lot simpler if you really want your employees to buy your business to just sell it to them. And I've seen various iterations of this over my career where maybe it's not all the employees that want to become part of the ownership group. Maybe there's just a series of middle or higher leaders that you think together should be the owners of the business together. And so I've worked on deals before where people have sold to groups of 3, 4, 5 people that work for them who together form sort of a partnership of sorts to become the acquirer. And then you can always, if you want to, you can always go down the path of selling parts of the current business to some employees, having them come on as shareholders, and then maybe have a succession plan over several years where you increasingly sell them more and more of your stake. There's lots of variations that you can do without having to get into some of these different tools that have a certain kind of structure associated with them. Some of them have tax advantages. I mean, this is something you talk to a CPA about, but it doesn't have to be as complicated as learning a new tool if you really just want to sell your business to some of your employees.
Here's what I was sort of dialing into, Dave, on your response, and I really appreciated that. It was, sort of selling out in sort of incrementally. How do you usually structure it as far as understanding when to start doing that? Like if I'm looking to exit in 5 years, do I start to think about selling out in parts sooner, or wait until the 5 years when I'm like, okay, now, and then that way, if I can still be taking some sort of level of compensation out of the company. Because this is where my naivety really comes through. I do have a highly profitable business. And so there's not a lot I need in 5 years coming out of this. But I do want to set my team up for absolute success. So sort of in my back of my mind, I was like, well, if I'm planning on taking out what I need over the next 5 years, maybe what I do is, have them take me on as an advisor. I get my health care, I get my 401k from them.
The very first thing to get your head around is the idea that working in a business and being its owner are two different things. So if you imagine Coca-Cola, right, their shareholders, they're getting dividends based on the profitability of the company. A person who drives a truck for Coke might go and buy some of their shares, but it doesn't mean that they earn a different salary than the other truck drivers, right? So that's the very first thing you have to tackle is what are your roles and responsibilities in the business, and what are those worth as though you were an employee running those responsibilities in the business. If you start to give employees equity in your business, it can be a very hard thing to undo. So I always recommend that there needs to be some sort of hurdle or gate to the very first actual real allocation of shares. So you might want to consider some sort of bonus program or challenge to get this ball rolling. So for example, you might create certain targets of performance of the business or different areas within the business. And you might say to your employees, if you achieve these goals or targets, your bonus or reward for this particular thing will be that we will issue you some stock in the company. And so that gets the foot in the door. Then they are part owner with you. And it might take a year for this to occur, right? Then you have to create some kind of schedule as to how often these additional tranches of shares will be sold. Now that they're owners, they're going to be entitled to part of the distributions or dividends of the profits out of the company. So the reason you want to create some kind of event where they buy in or are able to earn that original piece of stock is so they can start to get part of the distributions. They can then channel those profits into buying more stock from you. And so it all depends on how quickly you want to pull this off. But you could have, for example, a plan over a decade where every 2 years you go through a valuation process and you say, here's now how we value the business. And then these minority shareholders could choose to buy more stock from you. And that might mean that they're going to use the dividends they're earning from the company to buy shares from you. It could mean that they're going to save up their own money to buy shares from you, or that you are going to sell them shares and maybe you're going to finance the transaction to sell those shares. But over the course of time, increasingly, they will own more and more of the business. You will earn less and less. And as they earn more and more, they're going to get an increasing share of the profits, the dividends that come out of the business. And so it really just depends on how quickly you want this to happen. And, staying in as a part-time advisor with health benefits, for example, that's just part of this plan. For Kate to be a part-time advisor to the business is worth this amount of money, for example, or maybe it's just worth the health benefits. I don't know, whatever you decide. But that becomes part of the normal cost structure of the business. And people who own a business in the United States who have an LLC or an S Corp sometimes have a hard time really realizing what part of the cash flow from the business is their salary versus what is the profit, because often people just take money from the profitability for their, regular income needs. But you have to start thinking of it as two separate things, because it's really the distributions that are the money that gets shared with the other shareholders and yourself initially.
Yeah, so I certainly get all of that. What I'm looking for is simplicity. I went through the process of going through an acquisition before when I was going to exit. And I am still very proud of coming out of that and having the broker being like, wow, I've never seen, financials so tight in a small business. But here's my thing is I'm just going to say, if everything that you just talked about, I understand it from a perspective that people often are like, you're leaving money on the table. I think I told you my daughter's in private equity. She's always like, Mom, it sounds like you're going to be leaving a lot of money on the table. You should have some sort of earn it. I look for simplicity over anything.
Well, this is a very lucrative exit because not only will you be selling the business over the course of these transactions, but you're also going to be collecting your portion of the profits over time as well. So you'll be selling the business and you'll be collecting dividends or distributions on top of that. This is one of the most lucrative exits there can be. If you're looking for simple, then it would be gather some employees together and have them take out a loan and buy your business, just like you would sell it in an individual transaction to somebody else.
What are your thoughts around seller financing?
Well, it's a way to get the deal done. It's a tactic. I don't necessarily, some people will come and they'll say, hey, do you think I should seller finance my business? And it entirely depends on who the buyer is. Because in that role, we talked about the two hats, working in the business and owning the business. Now we're talking about being the banker too, which is again, is a different hat. So it really depends on who the buyer is and how much confidence you have in them. And I can tell you that sellers of small businesses who say, I need to be paid all cash, typically get a lower price because buyers will try to negotiate all their worries about different risks into the price. But if you say, I'm willing to finance some portion of the deal, and maybe there's an offset clause in the seller financing against certain key risks that might exist, then buyers are more comfortable with a higher price because they know that there's a contingency later if it turns out that something was misrepresented or something isn't the way it should be. There's a way for them to, post-close, get a better deal. And so people are comfortable with a higher price in those regards.
Paul, you've spoken here a few times about your hopes to eventually sell the business. Have you had any further thoughts on how you would hope to structure that sale?
Well, it depends on what form it actually takes. And there's two possibilities. One is I sell to a couple of the guys who work for me, and that's very much in line with what we just discussed. And in that case, I suppose I could see whether they could get an SBA loan to do a single transaction or seller finance. And I would be pretty comfortable seller financing with these two, particularly if I retain some of the stock until that period of the buyout was over. In other words, I sell them 90%, 45% each, and I retain 10%. So I'm basically the decider if they can't agree on something, because that's what I worry about most, having been through a partnership, is that there needs to be someone in charge of the business. And now the other possibility is I go out to some unknown buyer that I'm not, just take it to market and see who shows up. And I don't really know what that might look like. There's a lot of ways that could happen, but it would probably be something like, we're going to hand you a check and then you go away and we're going to destroy your business after that.
Have you ever taken your company to the market?
No.
Okay.
No, I mean, people are after me. I get a million emails all the time, but I pay no attention to those. I think that's just business brokers just emailing everybody with a pulse and seeing if they can get their hooks in. But I have not made a real effort to identify possible buyers and reach out to them and do a dog and pony show. I think that's a little premature. I'm just not ready to do that yet.
Kate, how many employees do you have?
Now, all total, 11.
You told us on a previous podcast that you had talked to your leadership, and I think there were two people in particular, and they took some time to think about it and came back and told you that they like what they're doing and they don't want you to sell. How are you thinking about whether you would prefer to sell just to the two of them versus to finding a way to sell to all of your employees?
Well, so I think there has to be some sort of gate to determine. And the two that are in this leadership role, they've both been with me for 5.5 years, and they are deeply committed. We have our leadership council meetings. They're dialed in. They're helping think about growth. They have that growth mindset. So they're my natural go-to. Now, in 5 years, because we're in a growth stage right now, as we continue to bring more people on, could there be somebody else? Potentially. I don't know. I just want to know how I should think about doing this in a simple way that makes sure that they know that I'm serious about this without, again, making my life harder or add complexities to my practice.
Oh, how much time do you need to spend there right now?
So that's the interesting thing. So for the last 3 years, we've been kind of having to hunker down. So I've been very much in my business. Now I'm starting to remove myself from the day to day. Like the last 3 weeks, it's been, damn near euphoria. Like I went to Dublin, I went to Malaga. I actually took a 2-week vacation. So I'm feeling like this is, like I'm in a better spot where I can, be focusing more on the scale to get this to a happier point again. But that's why I want to turn to these two in particular and say, okay, let's think about what it means if I exit in 5 years. We need to plug those holes. And part of that will also help with developing our scaling strategy.
So I think I've said on this podcast a few times that the benefit of business ownership is not in the exit, it's in the owning. And if you can get people on your team to be taking care of most of everything that needs to get done, and you're putting very little time into this, and you can just own it for the next 5 years while doing a few meetings a week, having a very manageable level of input, over the next 5 years, you will earn probably more than you could sell it for.
Yeah, that's exactly why when they came back and they were like, no, we want to keep it. I'm like, well, hell's yeah, because I make more money keeping this than selling it. So
why do you want to sell in 5 years?
Because I have a husband who's 10 years older than me. He's going to be fully retired. And I want to reinvent myself. How's that?
So then you could, if you wanted to, you could just run it for the next 5 years while giving them more and more responsibility to the point where you're comfortable that they are absolutely qualified to run everything to do with the business. And then in 5 years' time, you make a deal with them and they pay you over time. You hold the note on the whole deal, maybe collect payments over 10 years. It becomes sort of a retirement annuity. And you will have had a very successful exit for a small business owner.
And that's kind of the seller situation, yeah.
Now here's what could go wrong.
Of course, Dave's going to come with the.
Well, but you have to be prepared for this because one of them could get a terrible illness in the next 5 years that takes them out of work. Someone could have an accident. There could be some radical change in your industry from a technology or change in the customs of how things are done. There's all kinds of things that are potentially threatening how your business performs that we face every day in all businesses. And those same things, those same risks are going to be there for your employees after they become the owner. So you're still facing all these risks. That's why people decide to sell, is because they say, I want to move on to something else, and I do not want to continue to carry all of the burden of the risk of this business. So, and if you sell the business and you get 70% cash on closing and hold a 30% seller note, well, you're not exposed to risk on the money you got, right? So it's all degrees of how much risk you're willing to expose yourself to. Paul, in your situation, even if you decided to do seller financing for your employees, you've got a lot of equipment in your business, different kinds of saws and other apparatus. You could probably, for example, get some money on closing day by having the buyers, for example, bring a leasing company in to do a lease financing on all that gear. So there could be a way to turn some cash in on closing.
Well, in the woodworking world, the used equipment isn't worth much. Yeah, there's $1.5 million worth of equipment out there, but its depreciated value is probably under $100,000 at this point.
Right, but it's not the depreciated value that people lend against. It's the fair market value, which with the inflation over the last couple of years could be quite a lot more than you think.
Why is it?
So a bank might lend a percentage of fair market value. A leasing company might lend against a percentage of orderly liquidation value. The value of equipment does not equal what's on your balance sheet, which is what we call the book value, especially if people have used sort of bonus depreciation to try to manage their tax bill and things like that. So I'll give you a quick example because we do machinery and equipment appraisal here. There was a potato farmer, who unfortunately lost a tractor to a fire. He had bought this tractor just before the pandemic, and it was 5 years old at the time. He paid about I think it was $350,000 for it. And unfortunately, just a couple of years ago, it burned down when this building burned down. And then he made an insurance claim. And guess what? The brand new version of those tractors has gone up incredibly with all of the post-COVID inflation, the supply shocks, tariffs, etc. So the new version of that tractor is now over $900,000. When he went shopping for the same model year of his tractor, today the purchase price is over $450,000. So his used tractor actually went up in value over the course of time that he owned it, rather than going down in value because of the replacement cost of what the new ones go for. And used equipment is always valued vis-a-vis what it costs to buy new. And if you think about when you go shopping for a car, the reason you look at a used car is because you say new cars are very expensive. If new cars get even more expensive, then the value is still there, even if used cars go up too. So we've worked with a lot of people over the last couple of years in particular who have been blown away by the value of their plant and equipment in their business.
Well, that's a very interesting idea. And I think that for many industries, it might be a great idea. I would be pretty surprised if for woodworking equipment, there's much value there, because the fact is that the industry overall is contracting, and there's always quite a bit of used equipment on the market. And my equipment is pretty old. Like our major pieces are in the 20 plus years old range.
You got a bunch of that old green general stuff?
No, it's well, let's not go down that road because there's if we start talking about woodworking brands, I think everybody's just going to go to sleep. So let's just stipulate that I've got a bunch of old equipment, and it's an interesting idea which I've never thought of before, and maybe because of that, or maybe the reason is I've never heard anybody in woodworking talk about their equipment as a store of value, because it's generally considered to be just a scrap value when you liquidate. What?
Well, that's when you liquidate, and this is the difference, because when you appraise equipment, there's different definitions of value. So there's fair market value, which is what something would trade at maybe if you were going to go buy something from a dealer. And then there's fair market value in continued use, which actually also considers the delivery and installation and setup cost of the equipment too. Because if somebody's going to use the equipment in its current location, then these added advantages actually add to its value. So we appraised all of the equipment within a wooden window factory 3 years ago. It was significant. It was several $1 million.
How big a factory was it?
They were like 20,000 square feet or so, like that kind of size.
Well, as I said, I've never even considered that. I think that in my mind, the value of the company is not the equipment, it's the people who know what to do with it. Because the equipment itself is relatively generic. It's our business which is valuable. But, if there's somebody willing to overlook that inconvenient fact and just write us checks because we have equipment, yeah, bring them on.
Well, but what we're talking about here, you're talking about the enterprise value of your business based upon its cash flow, which derives from your position in the market and from your ability to deliver products people want, right?
Yeah.
The enterprise value is what someone's willing to pay for your business. If your business has goodwill, what that means is that the enterprise value is greater than the value of the equipment. Because the definition of goodwill is the difference between the value of a business and what the tangibles are worth inside of it. So for you, that would largely be equipment and inventory, materials, that kind of stuff. And so what I'm saying is that as that collateral exists, there's an opportunity for a buyer to use it to borrow. And so if you wanted to sell to your employees, at least the equipment value provides some kind of basis for some real lending, outside of like the SBA program, for example.
Well, I think that, this is all revelation to me, and it certainly sounds like I should look into it and see how would one go about contacting, I guess your company does this, but getting some idea of what that number is.
Well, I would say you want to start with the probable lenders. So you just talk with the bank you have a relationship with and just say, hey, if I sell my business, what does it look like for using my equipment as collateral? What would you require? What kind of loan to value are you guys willing to look at? And have that conversation just to see what they're saying. Because to get the appraisal done is going to cost money, but you want to have an idea of what potentially could be the outcome. And do you need to get the appraisal done right now? Probably not. The bank will want it if they ever do such a deal. But by looking at what things are selling for new, a rough estimate is that used equipment is like, between 35 and 50% of what new equipment is. So you can kind of ballpark it on your own.
Well, it's interesting because I just had a long session with my bank that spanned several months of trying to increase a line of credit from $200,000 to $400,000. And they asked about every single thing you could possibly imagine, except there was not one question about the value of the equipment. So is this something that only certain banks even think this way? Clearly the people in my bank couldn't care less what the value of the equipment is.
Well, are you giving them a balance sheet that shows the equipment's worth nothing?
Well, it's a balance sheet that shows depreciated.
Right.
We expense a lot of equipment because basically the balance sheet would not show. They were looking for every possible thing to collateralize this loan. My personal, this, that, the cars, do you own a fish tank? Whatever. They were after all of it. But nobody asked about the equipment. And so I'm just kind of surprised. It's what you're saying makes perfect sense. Yes, the equipment helps the business run and it's worth something. And you could have an auction and sell it. But it didn't seem to be of the slightest interest to my bank.
It could very well be that the person you were talking with just didn't think of it, and there was no number on your balance sheet that kind of drew their attention towards that as a potential asset. Were they more interested in assets outside the business, like your personal assets? Because the first thing they look at is whether you've got the cash flow to support the payments. That's kind of number one. And if you don't, then they'll often go looking for assets outside the business as kind of part of that owner's personal guarantee backing it.
Okay, so again, what I just went through is maybe not the poster child for all seller finance lending, but we're just talking about increasing a working capital line of credit from $200,000 to $400,000. And this is a line that I've had since 2017, and I've only drawn down on maybe once or twice. But I knew that we had some upcoming need for a bigger backstop than $200,000. And so there wasn't any issue with repayment. I have personally in my checking account enough to write them a check for $400,000 any given day. It's no problem. It was still more that their process was so bizarre. The guys came out to the factory and I gave them a tour and they were extremely excited. They loved it. They're like, "Oh, I'm a woodworker," but it never came up as part of the whole evaluation of could I repay this loan. Part of it was on the face of it, I can repay the loan. There's no issue. It's just a question of I would rather have the business have a line of credit than have to write checks to it myself. So,
did you get the increase, Paul? Did it go to $400,000?
Did eventually, but my goodness, it was an ordeal. I've been banking with these guys for almost 15 years, maybe even longer, and they can see we make money. It shouldn't be a problem. But
did you have to use personal assets as they've asked to backstop it?
Yeah, when you sign an agreement like that, you're eventually you're down there in the fine print somewhere. You're backstopping it with your personal assets. But I wasn't too concerned about that because there's like pretty much a 0% chance that we're not going to be able to repay a line of credit. It was more that we just accepted a very large job, which would kind of tie up the shop for a number of months and prevent us from the ordinary flow business where we do smaller jobs, take deposits, ship them out, get balances. So we were going to have kind of a pause in the ordinary pattern of payments. And so that's why I wanted to have the backstop and line of credit. I'm not sure I'm even going to draw it down this year at all.
When I work with Americans who are buying businesses, we always look at the assets within the business, because if there's sufficient assets to collateralize a loan for the acquisition, it means that they have the door open to a conventional bank financing versus SBA, and conventional is always cheaper, like sometimes 3 percentage points cheaper on the interest rate. And so that's the one advantage that asset-heavy businesses have, is that this door is open to more conventional financing because they've got this collateral there.
Well, David, it sounds to me like you're a hell of a lot smarter than my bankers, and which doesn't surprise me at all. But, I think that this is very interesting, and I'm glad you brought it up. I just learned something.
Paul, do you have a fish tank?
Not anymore.
It's in the lobby of the bank.
It was the sweetener. Got it across the finish line. I take the fish tank down.
Before we go on to something else, Dave, do you have any other suggestions for Kate, just in terms of her thinking through what structure makes the most sense for her? Is there a path you suggest she might follow or listeners might follow to just understand all the options that are out there for an owner looking to sell?
Yeah, you have to consider what it is that's pushing you, because in my experience, small business owners don't sell to cash out in the way that Mark Zuckerberg might sell his Facebook stock, right? Small businesses sell for relatively low multiples of cash flow. And so people really need to have a pressing personal concern, in my experience, to actually do a deal. And you got right to the finish line on a deal that you backed out of, right? And this is not the first time we've been on the show where you've been talking about this. So the big thing would be making the decision of, do you want to sell, and why is it a pressing personal concern for you? Because if it's not a pressing personal concern, you are always going to have probably hundreds of thousands of reasons every year not to do this deal, because owning the business is very lucrative to you, right? And so if you're not there where you need to sell the business because you want to turn this chapter in your life, then think about ways to get the management structures in place so that you can continue to own it and continue to benefit from the business, knowing that it is a risky asset. And if one of those things I talked about earlier would happen, the business could end up in trouble or what have you. But if you can run this business without investing much of your time for 3-4 years, well, you'll already clock the amount of money probably that you would have received in a sale. And so you really have to reflect on whether you are truly motivated to do this deal or not. And then once you make the decision, then you have to act quickly, because if you mentally check out from the business, what'll happen is your energy will go off, and the employees will pick up on that, and the way that they behave in the business and how they treat the customers and everything will be affected all the way down. And then you end up with a decline in sales and earnings. And then that's the thing you have to avoid, is you have to make the decision and make the sale happen while you've got a full head of steam. Because once things start to slide, everyone's going to look at the sliding financial performance and they're going to assume it's going to carry on, and then people don't want to pay you as much.
All right, so I had another big question that I was going to throw at you guys that we clearly do not have time for. But I've also got a little one that I think is relevant to a lot of business owners. It comes from a post that I read on the small business subreddit, and it's about having to lay off a relative. Let me read what this owner wrote. Ugh, I knew I'd be in this situation at some point. We have to make some staffing reductions and need to lay off some folks. One is my relative, not immediate, but a degree away from a cousin. I know my family will not be happy about it, but it needs to be done, and they are the appropriate person based on skills, how well they fit in with the team, etc. It's the best thing for the business, but it's just going to stink as they are a good person, but best one to go right now. Any sage advice other than not to have hired them in the first place? Anybody?
Oh boy. Laying anybody off, relative or not, is difficult. And I went through not a relative, but a layoff last year. And I think the first thing is to make the case for why you're doing it. In other words, to understand what is the company now, what are its revenues, what are its expenses, why are you doing this? And then to be very clear about what happens if you don't do it. Because at the end of the day, the job of the business owner is to defend the group, not the individuals in the group. And if you've got too many people and you're running through all your working capital, and because you're too kind-hearted, you don't do tough things, then the whole business fails, and then everybody's worse off. Now, that doesn't make it any easier when you choose the ones who have to go as opposed to the ones who get to stay, but it's just reality. If you were in a good position, you wouldn't be doing layoffs. And I think that also don't be flippant about it. Don't try to make any jokes while you do it. Make sure that you understand and sympathize with the gravity of being laid off. I've never been laid off, but I've done it, and I've watched people walk out, and it's pretty clear it's devastating, particularly if they've been chosen from amongst a group of peers for rational reasons. It's basically a way of grading your employees, and nobody wants to be at the back end of that list of people. And so it's a terrible thing, and I'm very sorry that you're having to do it. Having it be a relative is even worse, but it really can't affect your decision to do it, because if it needs to be done, it needs to be done. And now you're going to see this person at parties and what have you. It's just going to suck. There's no way around it. And hopefully that's motivation to make other changes to make sure that you're not in that position again. That's what I would say.
Paul, you started by saying that the first thing to do is to explain to this person why it's necessary.
I would explain to the whole company why it's necessary, because if you're just disappearing people one by one and not providing the information of why that's happening, then people are going to start making up stories. And this is one of my hard and fast rules of business ownership. You don't provide a story, everybody else will make one up, and you probably won't like what they make up. So you better fill in the gaps and make sure everybody's clear on the situation.
There's a second question there, though, Paul. The first thing is why it's necessary for the business to lay people off, especially in this case, our relative. I think the next question is, why is it necessary to lay me off? How do you deal with that?
Well, it's easier if it's more than one person being laid off. If you had 4 people and only one was getting laid off, it's hard for that person to not draw the conclusion that they're the least valued employee, because they are the least valued employee. That's just the way the world works. But if you can do something to make sure that everybody's clear that this is a bad situation, and that unfortunately the fix involves eliminating people, it's possible you can spread the pain. Like when I did a layoff, I laid off 6. Everybody else took a pay cut, 10%. And I said, I'm taking a pay cut of 100% because we got to get through this. And then defining a fix and saying, and here's how the fix will work. If we cut our expenses, we can be in business long enough to see what else comes in the door. That was the message I gave people. Like, I've been around for a long time. I've seen months that were bad, but generally it comes back in some way. Now, if the reason the business is in trouble is because the owner is screwing up or the market is disappearing and will never come back, that's just a different situation. But at least being clear about why you're doing what you're doing is very helpful to both the person and the other people. I was able to say, there's nobody at fault here. We're just experiencing a bad market. It's not my fault. It's not your fault. But somebody has to go. It's the way it goes. And I think that most people actually have more ability to absorb trouble than owners realize. Because that's just human existence. And we're all more resilient when we need to be than you would have thought. If you think that you can avoid it, you're like, well, I could possibly do this or that. And then when you're in it, you're like, look at me, I'm doing this and that. And I think that's just part of being a human being.
Kate, you offer HR services to businesses. Do you have any advice on how to lay off a relative?
Well, it's funny because emotionally on a personal side, I'm like, it'd probably be easier for me.
What does that say about your family, Kate?
Yeah, I know. So I'm kind of with Paul on this. It's always got to be about the fidelity of the company. So we're just very, very clear on why this is happening and making sure that we know that it is not specific to the individual.
Dave, do you have any thoughts?
I do. I agree with everything that's been said here. My only added thought is that once a decision is made, you can't delay. The person who is working there, whether they're family or not, is an adult who is engaging in what is supposed to be a mutually beneficial relationship. They're selling you their time. You're paying them. You're supposed to use their time to the benefit of the company to make earnings and all that kind of stuff. If the decision has been made, you got to let them know as fast as possible so that they can undertake their own agency and decision making and figure out what they're going to do. And I find a lot of the times business owners develop this position where they feel like they are responsible for or need to take care of their employees, forgetting that these are autonomous people with agency and decision-making ability of their own. And you don't know what else is going on in that person's life. Or if they just turn something down because of their loyalty to the company. Like, once a decision's been made, you've got to bring that person in as soon as possible so that they can start to act on that news and try to clear the path for whatever outcome they're able to determine for themselves.
My thanks to David C. Barnett, Paul Downs, and Kate Morgan, and a special thanks to our sponsor. This episode was brought to you by Grasshopper Bank. Thanks for listening, everyone. One thing before you go. Everything we do at 21 Hats is created by entrepreneurs for entrepreneurs to help us all learn together. If you get something out of listening to these podcast episodes, consider joining the conversation. You can do that by joining the 21 Hats Sounding Board, a Slack channel where you can tap the wisdom of a very smart crowd, or by becoming a founding member and joining our monthly Zoom forum, where you can be part of conversations much like the ones we have on the podcast. You can sign up for both by subscribing to the Morning Report. If you have any questions, you can email me at lauren@21hats.com. And if you get something out of this podcast or out of the Morning Report, please tell a friend, tell an enemy, tell every business owner you know. Your word of mouth, owner to owner, will always be the most effective way to build this community for all of us. Thank you. It means a lot. This episode was produced by another entrepreneur, Jess Stuberon, founder of Blank Word Productions. Thanks for listening, everyone.